Welcome to Angels, Exits, and Acquisitions, the place to learn how to fund, scale, exit, and massively profit as an angel investor or entrepreneur. Brought to you by the Angel Investors Network. And now, here's your host, Jeff Barnes.
Hey there, this is Jeff Barnes, CEO of Angel Investors Network, and we just did the podcast with a gentleman by the name of Todd Smith, CEO and founder of Blue Horizon Venture Consulting. Now, Todd brings a wealth, over 2 decades of experience to the startup world and consulting with startups on their business planning process, their financial models, their revenue models, and whatnot to help them become successful. And the cool thing about what Todd does is that less than 1%, you may not be aware of this, but less than 1% of all entrepreneurs ever receive any sort of funding beyond their own credit cards, maybe a personal loan or a bank loan, right? Most people never get that capital from outside sources. However, Todd's clients experience 50% success rates, which is pretty incredible. And of course, the proof is in the numbers. And you just have to listen to this conversation that we had discussing what he does and how he does it. And we talk a little bit about the democratization of capital. And you'll want to listen toward the middle of the interview about the biggest mistakes that entrepreneurs make when it comes to business planning. And go through that. Make sure you re-listen to that because it's so incredibly insightful. We also talk about the difference between ideas, products, services, and creating a plan and what a strategic plan really is. Now, if you are an entrepreneur or even an investor and you love this idea of the lean startup, we talk about some of the flaws of the lean startup methodology and how strategic planning really comes in and fills those gaps. Some of the inherent weaknesses of most entrepreneurs and what you can do to overcome those, and what the first sniff test is that every investor needs to understand before taking that next step into reviewing a business or an opportunity. So make sure you listen to this interview all the way through. Great insights, great information. And then, of course, check out the show notes at angelinvestorsnetwork.com/podcast to see all the links that we mentioned in the interview. Looking forward to hearing your comments. Go ahead and leave those on the podcast page or in whatever subscription service you use to listen to this podcast. Thanks again. All right, welcome everyone. Again, this is Jeff Barnes, Angels and Exits and Acquisitions podcast with Angel Investor Network, and I'm here with my co-host, E-Rock. E-Rock, how are you doing today?
I am well, excited to have an amazing guest here today on what we're calling Memorial Day. So let's memorialize this event.
Yeah, that sounds good. There's no rest for the weary, right? So yeah, we'll just go ahead and dive right into it. I'm really excited to talk with Todd Smith of Blue Horizon Ventures. And what Todd is doing is actually pretty incredible because he is helping startups and entrepreneurs go out there and raise capital using his services. And the statistics are less than I think it's even less than 1% of all companies that go out and try to raise capital ever raise capital from anybody other than potentially a bank. And Todd and his team have an incredible way of going out there and finding entrepreneurs and companies that have a chance of succeeding and helping them to build up a business plan and go out there and get funded. And if I'm not mistaken, the number of people that actually get funded using Todd's services are over 50%. So with that being said, I want to welcome Todd Smith, CEO of Blue Horizon Venture Consulting, to the call. How are you doing today, Todd?
Very well, Jeff, and thanks for having me. I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, the road that you have traveled to where you are today is, I wouldn't say atypical of most entrepreneurs, but it did take a very winding, turning road, which is that you've been on both sides of the equation, have you not?
Yeah, I'd say that's a fair statement. I've seen, I've been an entrepreneur. I've raised money for my own businesses, but I've been consulting as well for more than 20 years, and helping entrepreneurs is kind of a passion that developed over time, and I love doing it, love helping, and it's super rewarding to see people build sustainable businesses and hire people and kind of add to the economy. It's just awesome.
Absolutely. So, most people are not born with that desire to just help the economy. So what was it that led you into becoming an entrepreneur? And then from that, how did you transition from being the entrepreneur to helping other entrepreneurs with the process of raising capital, which is the least favorite thing for everybody to do?
Well, I started my career in the corporate world with companies like IBM and Florida Blue. And I gained a lot of great experience. I don't knock the experience by any stretch. I worked in international accounting and mergers and acquisitions, competitive intelligence. So I was able to kind of build a nice little skill set. But I always had that entrepreneurial itch ever since I was a kid, whether it's delivering newspapers or raking leaves or shoveling snow or whatever the case may be. I was always out there earning money, and so there's that kind of underlying passion that I had to do that kind of work. And so I started my own companies, and they kind of flopped miserably. I had a travel business that I started in the early 90s, and I was at the time when all the Expedias and Travelocities of the world were just getting started, and the internet kind of blew up that whole industry. So the timing was pretty bad, but it was a good learning experience. Failure always is, and so I kept going, and some of the corporate experiences I had kind of drove me back to entrepreneurship as well. Just kind of putting a lot of time and effort into things and not getting any reciprocal value back. So I ended up going back to business school at UCLA, and the timing for that couldn't have been any better because 1998 was kind of the .com boom was really rolling, and it was kind of a neat time to be involved. And I actually started as a student, doing consulting with startups. There was so much money kind of flying around, and startups just popping up everywhere and really no expertise. So they were hiring students or any warm body basically they could to come in and try to help them. And it was a lot of fun. It was the Wild West, literally. But I gained a lot of valuable experience there, and I've been doing it ever since for the last 20-some years, 22 years, and I love it. I love helping people get started. I love seeing companies form out of nothing, see people create jobs and add to the economy, and it's really fun and rewarding.
Nice. Well, I appreciate that. Yeah. So now, when you say that you love helping the startups and you love helping them to create the company's job, tell us a little bit about how you help them, because what you do is very specific to one specific part of a startup. It's not just you're not like an executive coach necessarily. You're not necessarily the marketing expert that's just teaching them how to do marketing to get their company off the ground. What you do is very specific. So I want people to understand exactly, kind of what it is that the secret sauce that Todd and Blue Horizon brings to the table.
Yeah, and I appreciate that question, Jeff, because it's the earliest stage of a startup is when they really kind of have to plan. And when I say that, I think about some of the fads or trends that have gone on in the startup world, whether it's lean startups or developing MVPs. And I don't knock that in any stretch. I think that those methodologies make a ton of sense. But at the end of the day, when you're starting a company, you have to do your homework. You have to plan. You have to build a financial forecast, and you really need to do this work to kind of elevate your chances of success. And unfortunately, people hear what they want to hear a lot of times, and so they hear, investors don't want business plans anymore, which may be true. They don't want to read crappy business plans because most of the ones that get done are pretty crappy. It does take a pretty rare skill set to be able to do a lot of research, synthesize that research, and write a compelling story and vision about a company, and be able to model the finances of the company for the first 5 years of existence, and understand all of those other areas like operations or HR or finance or IP, any of those things that you kind of need to bring together a cohesive plan to present to people. And going back to that research element, if you don't understand your market and your competitors and your customers, you're not going to get very far. And yeah, you might create a pitch deck that interests some investors, but when they start asking you questions and drilling down into what you're trying to do, and you don't have answers, you're going to be in trouble. You're going to fail, and that's because you weren't prepared. So the value of going through the business planning process on the front end is immense, because you greatly increase your chances of success for raising that capital. And strategically, I think it's great to have that vision as well. And even if if you're one of these organically funding entrepreneurs that doesn't really have to go out and raise capital, you still need to have that plan and that vision and that forethought to succeed, or otherwise you're kind of chasing your tail and making mistakes, and a lot of bad things can happen. So that's kind of my soapbox about business plans and funding packages. But I think it's pretty relevant and true. And the proof is in the success rate when people do it and they're focused on implementation. They succeed, and when they kind of do it halfway or don't do it at all, then they, more often than not, like we said, 99% of people fail. So pretty obvious the right way to go. People like to shortcut, and there's not much you can do there, but we're here to help if people want to do things the right way.
So Todd, I'm curious, you've been doing this for quite some time, long track record of obviously of success and knowledge and learning. What would you say is something that's really different now, that like within the last 5 years that you've seen evolve over perhaps like a decade ago? And then what would your prognostication where you think maybe the future of raising capital might be going in like 5 to 10 years from now?
Well, that's a great question too. And the really cool thing, and it harkens to your business with Angel Investors Network, is the democratization of capital and crowdfunding, which has kind of come down in the last 6-7 years. I was really involved in that right from the get-go of the Jobs Act being passed, and I attended a lot of these crowdfunding conferences and tried to stay in tune with all of that. And it's still a work in progress. Obviously, when you've got a lot of hurdles, governmental hurdles with the SEC, and a lot of the hoops they make you jump through, I think it's kind of being felt out right now, and both sides are kind of going through the government side, and the business side is pushing back and saying, hey, let's raise some of the caps on loan limits or raise limits, and let's reduce some of the red tape. And then the government's saying, okay, well, we're concerned about fraud and other things. And, as we gain experience in crowdfunding, then I think, it just opens up more of those avenues for startups and early stage companies to raise money that way. So that's pretty exciting. I do think investors have become a lot more selective after the dot-com implosion and after the mortgage meltdown. They're pretty cautious, and so raising money pre-revenue is really hard to do. I'm not saying it's impossible, but so finding ways to bootstrap early raises and seed raises in order to get you past that MVP stage and get you post-revenue to where you stand a much better chance of raising capital is really kind of the way of the world these days. And so it's a lot more difficult, I guess, in the super early stage. But if you kind of follow the framework and kind of how things are done, it can be done. So those are my points anyway.
So I'm curious, obviously you come from a pretty credible background, career, having worked in corporate America in some very valuable sectors, and you're going along this journey. Was there a moment where you recall really kind of like having this moment of clarity and epiphany, if you will, of like, hey, this is where I'm like really talented and gifted at? And then do you remember the process, or do you recall like the feeling of having helped to fund that first company that you worked with?
Yeah, and ironically, it was an online mortgage broker company, and I was a student in business school, my first year of business school, and they just kind of put out a desperate plea for help and said, hey, we need somebody to help us to write a business plan. I didn't know much about it. I was studying it in school, but I was able to do that work and pull tons of research together and on the industry and build something compelling. And it was a fun process. I learned a lot. That's one of the things I love about what I do. And I get to work across a broad spectrum of industries and stages of growth. So I get to learn a lot constantly. And that kind of fuels my passion for doing this, because I'm always learning something. So that first instance in my first year of business school in the middle of the dot-com era was kind of the fire that lit under me. And I said, wow, this is really cool. I could actually make a living doing this. They were paying ridiculous amounts back then. But, it was still, I knew that, the client was super appreciative. They were successful. I made some money while I was a student. I was like, this is really cool. I was, poor graduate student, and now I had thousands of dollars in the bank, and I could turn around and do this over and over again, and build my business as well. So it was really cool, and there was no turning back from that point. It was just something that I was good at, that helped other people, and it was kind of a win-win across the board. And so I'm still going strong 22 years later.
Nice. Now, you said something earlier that I think is really important for anybody to understand, which is you said, there's strategic vision that's built when you go along and create the business plan itself. And if you do it correctly, then it helps strengthen the organization. It helps to build up that vision, right? If you don't do it at all, you're unlikely to raise capital to begin with, or your business might flounder. And it made me think about the 7 P's that we use in the Navy, which is proper planning prevents piss poor performance. And I love saying that because, one, it's just easy to say and it's kind of funny. But on the other hand, it's so true, right? The companies that do the most amount of planning on the front end, even though they don't think they need it, they think they know the product, they know the service, they know their market, they're just going to go out there and wing it and figure it out. But then you get down the path and you realize, oh, wow, we didn't think about this, or we didn't take into account this competitor or this market dynamic. So when you start thinking about the customers, the clients that you're working with, and how you're helping them to build a strategic plan that will help them go out there and raise capital or launch their business, what are some of the biggest pitfalls that they face when, let's say, for example, the 30% that have already hired somebody that's cheap, then they come to you and they're like, hey, fix it. What are the biggest mistakes that they're making when they're going out there and trying to do it on their own?
Yeah, Jeff, that's a good question. I think there's a lot of mistakes they could conceivably make. And I will say that, when you think about this, lean startups say basically go out and create a product, go sell it, and then create it. So you're not wasting all this time planning. But again, I go back to people hear what they want to hear, and it's like, oh, I don't ever have to plan. And that's the big error. And so they end up flying around by the seat of their pants and making all kinds of mistakes. My process, and I think it bears itself out, is to really start with finances. That's my background, but I also think that your financial plan is kind of the skeleton of your entire business, and you build something without a skeleton, and it's just flopping all around, and it doesn't have any structure. So I like to do that first, and I'll take somebody through the exercise of saying, all right, tell me about your revenue model. What are your products? What is the potential volume of sales? What is your pricing? And I walk them through this process. It forces them to think, first of all. A lot of them haven't done any of this critical thinking. But we go through and we talk about the revenue model. We talk about their expense models. We talk about the people they're going to hire. And people are a little bit myopic when it comes to starting their business, because they're thinking about what's going to happen in the next month, what's going to happen in the next 3 months. And I'm pushing them down the road, and I say, I want you to think about what's happening for the first 5 years of this company. Who are you going to hire in? When are you going to hire them? Why are you going to hire them? What kind of capital expenditures are you going to need to get this thing up off the ground? And that process is really powerful, because it not only does it help me to create their financial model, which kind of leads you to, okay, what's the potential value of this business? When and how much capital am I going to need? But it helps them, think about their operations and their HR plan, and their product and resources, and all these things they're going to have to do. And then, once we go through that process, I like to go back and I say, okay, well, we have to research this market and understand that what's happening in the market, not just in the past, but what the trends are looking like and what the future may hold, and understanding the customers and the competition and where your space is in that whole market. And it's possible to go through this process, and I've had it happen a number of times, where you're kind of analyzing the feasibility of this business, and you end up killing it, because you do this work, and it's good. I can't remember the expression, but it's kill it fast and move on to something else, versus pumping a bunch of money into something that's ultimately going to fail. So fail fast, I guess, is the expression.
Yeah, fail fast and fail forward, right?
Yeah. So doing that, that legwork, I think, is super valuable. And then, if it passes that kind of feasibility sniff test, then you can go in and flesh out the remainder of the business plan and, all of your operations and finance and marketing and all that great stuff that goes into it.
I wanted to make sure I highlight a couple of things there, because you just talked about some of the biggest mistakes that people make when they're planning their business. So I've been a lean startup coach, trainer. I've gone through Osterwalder's methods, Eric Rees. I've done all this stuff, and I help facilitate it. And you're exactly right. Like, people hear exactly what they want to hear, which is, you don't need a plan. You have a great idea, go test it, see if it works. But they don't get to the point of, does anybody else even consider that this is a potential opportunity, right? They just think that they're going to build this MVP of this prototype because they had a problem, right? And it's a double-edged sword, because a lot of us will say, oh, well, I invented such and such. It's just I didn't actually do anything, and somebody else got all the credit for it. Like, how many times have we seen something come to the market? We're like, I thought about that a few years ago, but you didn't do anything with it. And so there's the people that think about a great idea, but they don't do anything about it. Then there's the people that jump really quickly into creating something, but they haven't even tested the waters to see if there is something. And so I think what you're kind of hinting at is that there's a fine balance between this, right? There's the balance of, hey, I have a really cool idea, and I think that it could actually make money. It could potentially turn into a product or an actual business. God forbid, you only create one product and that's it. You want to actually create a business around this. But once you take that next step into, okay, I have something solid here. The majority of entrepreneurs are not business people. Like, let's be honest. We throw this word out, entrepreneur, just so readily these days because it's sexy, it's cool. Everybody likes the idea of, being with Gary Vee and talking with him about entrepreneurship, or being on the next show. Entrepreneurship's not sexy. What a lot of people are is, maybe they're inventors, maybe they're visionaries, maybe they're thinkers or tinkerers, but they're not really the entrepreneurial leaders that go out there and build a business. So the misunderstanding is that once you have a product idea or even a service idea, it's not a business idea. And until they've gone through that planning process, they can't really turn that product or service into an actual business. I think that's kind of what you're hinting at, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a balance there. It's not that we're throwing out the whole concept of business plans. And it's also not that you have to dive right into one the minute you have an idea. I think there's a balance between that MVP creation, lean startup ideology, and then once you've kind of proven your point there, then it's time to do that strategic planning, dive into it, build everything out. I've had to fight against that for the last probably 10 or more years, against this idea that business plans are dead. They're never going to be dead. But it's just that, people want to always push that easy button and figure, hey, I can throw a pitch deck together and people are going to throw money at me, and it doesn't happen. It never happens. So.
Wouldn't it be nice, right? Like, that's the business that I'm in, right? Is getting up there and raising capital for our ventures, for our companies, or helping people learn that. And we're actually going through this ourselves here at AIN. And by the time that this podcast is aired, we'll have made the announcement of what we're doing. But we have to go back and we have to plan out the next 5-10 years. And one of the greatest quotes I think I ever heard when it comes to this stuff is that the majority of people barely think past the next meal, right? They barely think beyond what they're going to do. That's why so many people they decide at 4 p.m. what they're going to do for dinner at 5 o'clock, and they just go to McDonald's and get the drive-thru, right? So the majority of people barely think past the end of their own nose. There's maybe that mid-level manager person that might think the next week or the next month, and then you have the senior managers that are like the next quarter, and then you get to the executive level. Yeah, they're thinking maybe 5 years out. But the brilliant people, the ones that we would consider the foremost leaders of society, of business, they're thinking decades out, yep. Right? And of course, none of us can tell the future, but they also have the Napoleon Bonaparte mentality, which is, I will create my own future. And they go out there and they start implementing, but it can't happen unless you do your research, you have a plan, and you start executing towards a plan. It doesn't mean that the plan never changes, right? I mean, we always have to pivot on plans because nothing turns out exactly like we want it to. But I just love that the whole idea that you have to start thinking a little bit further down the road about your business. You can't think just what the next week or the next pay period is going to look like.
Yeah, and over the years, I've kind of found that regardless of an entrepreneur's background, their inherent weaknesses tend to be in finance and in marketing. And maybe that's by virtue of even the people that are educated in our business schools, like I've been. There's knowledge that's lacking, and that can be sales or direct response. We've both been involved in the Dan Kennedy world of direct response marketing or technology, and none of this stuff you get taught in school. So you kind of have to self-teach some of that and implement it into your business. And so I go back to the idea that no man is an island, and so regardless of how you're building out your business, bringing other people in to help you in those areas where you're weak is super critical. And building a team, even if you're a solopreneur, you still need a team around you. You need advisors, you need help, you need an accountant or a controller or a part-time CFO or whatever the case may be. And I think some people still kind of harbor that, my IP is super special and my business is mine, and they don't open up to the outside world enough to the point that they can kind of be successful if they bring these other people on board and share their ideas. And there's really ideas are plentiful out there, and the ability to execute on those ideas is what's super critical and what's rare. So I think that's part of the key as well. And when you go through this whole business plan process, you can start to recognize your own weaknesses as well and say, hey, I'm not a numbers guy. This is not my strength. I need somebody to come in and help me with this. Or my tech skills are horrible. I don't know how to write an email, so I need to hire this A, B, and C company to come in and do my marketing and social media. So I think there's a lot that goes into it, but at least going through that process is very eye-opening for a lot of people, and then they can learn to fill in the gaps and kind of make themselves into a more sustainable, viable venture.
So I want to ask a couple quick questions here, kind of hopefully one is related to the other. So you discussed that you have this excellent track record of helping the clients that you work with get funding. I think Jeff alluded to like less than 1% of all companies that go out seeking capital are able to effectively raise capital. So what would you say is, how are you able to, what's the process, or without revealing anything that's too proprietary or secret sauce, but maybe there's one or two things that you can advise people on what they should absolutely make sure that they're doing when trying to raise capital when it comes to their business plan. And then two, are you also helping them to seek out the investors in creating introductions to help them raise capital, or do they take your business plan and coaching and go into the forest and battle for themselves?
Yeah, great question. Thanks for that. I'll answer the second part first. Yeah, absolutely. We put our money where our mouth is and help people, go out and raise capital. So, because I think there are a lot of misnomers about raising capital as well, and understanding how investors think is important. It's important when you develop a business plan, because they're the audience. So most of the time. Now, if it's just a strategic business plan, they're going to have all organic growth. Maybe you write things a little bit differently than you might otherwise. But I always start with the audience in mind and understanding, and again, going back to building that financial model. Well, that financial model kind of tells you, hey, we're going to need this much capital. Well, I understand how much capital I'm going to need. That kind of dictates the types of investors or lenders that you might get involved in your deal. And then you can kind of target them accordingly. So, there's some percentage of that failure to raise capital that has to do with writing a bad business plan and not doing your homework and research. And there's another part of it that is not understanding the process and not, aligning yourself with investors who, are going to invest in your stage, in your geography, or in your industry. And you want to have those things kind of teed up as well. It says, hey, this person might invest in seed startups here in Florida and in the healthcare industry. So you're matching the right investors with the right deals. And then from that point, it's up to you to kind of sell the deals. Now, my experience over the years, at least from the investor perspective, is that one of the first things they look at to pass their sniff test is the numbers and the team, and those are, to them, those are super critical. Is this business capable of giving me the returns that I seek, and is this team capable of executing on this idea? Those are the big two from the investor side. And if you don't have those things ready to go to kind of pass that initial test, you're not going to get anywhere. You've got to get over that first hurdle, and then you might get second, third, fourth meetings and get to due diligence and get a term sheet. But only if you pass that initial test. And so from that perspective, I think those are the critical issues. And when you're a lone wolf entrepreneur, it's not saying it's impossible to raise money, but you still have to create that team of advisors and people that are contractors, people that are helping you out. And then I think if you have those things in place, you have a good business plan backing up those ideas, then when you go out and you match up correctly with the stage, geography, and industry, you stand a pretty good chance. You've done a lot more than the vast majority of startups out there to kind of put yourself in the right position. Now, whether or not you'll still get bites is remains to be seen. To kind of gauge the activity in your industry. Some industries are hot, some industries not so much, and so and then if you don't have a track record, that can hurt you as well. So maybe you need to go out and find a co-founder or somebody who can kind of take you to that next level. And so there's ways to mitigate those shortcomings with any business if you're willing to do it. And that's really the trick.
Love that. So, Todd, I'm just being mindful of time here, kind of looking at what we got. We've already got a lot of great bullet points here and insights that I think that any entrepreneur can use, and then the investors too. Let's go ahead and transition just really quickly over to, that target audience, right? That's the one thing that it gets to be a challenge for entrepreneurs, because when an entrepreneur is going out there and they're working on their baby, they're building their baby, whatever that is, their widget, their product, their business, their service, they are focused, if they're really good at it, they're really focused on the experience of their business, their product, their service for the consumer, the end user, whoever that might be. But now they have to put their minds in a different place to raise capital. They have to think about somebody that's maybe never going to even see the product or the service or use it, or never experience that. So they have to transition to putting themselves in the mind of that customer, right? The investor customer. And like you said, I love that idea. The first test that you have to pass is that sniff test of your numbers. Do your numbers even make sense? Does your team even make sense? And that obviously makes sense to us because we've been going through this, and we know that we invest in the jockey and the horse, not just one or the other. So we're always looking at the combination thereof. But when the investor is looking at a business plan, what is something beyond just like that sniff test? What is it that they're looking at to say, let's just say they have 10 different opportunities. What do you think is going to be the one that really stands out? Is it going to be their intent to focus on a specific industry, a specific sector, or is it really coming down to the team? Because, and I'm just going to give you my thoughts on this before I let you answer. My thought is that it's not a pure financial gain. I don't think that that's the number one reason that people become an angel investor. I really don't believe that. There's a few people out there that are looking to hit that home run. That's all they want to do. But they're generally not those people. So if we were to take that off the table, and unless, maybe I'm wrong on this one, but that's just what I've seen. But if that's not the case, what do you think it is that, an investor's looking at when they're sitting across the table with that entrepreneur having a discussion? Let's say, assuming they passed that initial test.
I think a lot of it comes down to personality, and if it's someone they like, that can make a huge difference. They want to help. I do think there's an element of that financial return, and a lot of these guys think in terms of, hey, I know I'm going to go into 10 deals, and maybe 4 of them will hit, 2 of them will be marginal, 2 of them might be home runs, and 6 of them I might completely lose my money outright. So they have that mindset that not every deal is a winner, but they look at things like is the business scalable? Is there a market for this? Is there a social impact? And I think we're seeing that more and more these days, where that becomes a very important determining factor. Is this business helping solve one of the world's problems? And a lot of investors kind of lean that way, which is very cool. Don't get me wrong; I think that's pretty awesome. So that helps if you understand the people you're talking to and what they're all about. The investors as your audience, I think that can be very helpful. And sometimes it's just a personality fit too. It's like these people just hit it off, and there's something that clicks between them, and they invest. So it's a lot of, I guess, shaking hands isn't the way of the world these days, but it's
it's the intangibles, right? It's the things that you can't really
Zoom meetings.
It's the things that you can't necessarily put into a business plan. Like, you're going to love me because I'm really cool and I love to take care of the starving kids around the world, right? Like,
right.
You might get that in a conversation, but I think what it comes down to, and you make this undertone of your point, is that you have to get out there. You have to know your stuff. Like you first and foremost, you have to know your business, your market, your industry, your numbers. Like, if you don't know your numbers, just don't even go in the door, right? But let's assume you know all that stuff. The next thing is getting out there and finding the strategic fit, right? We used to, in corporate VC, we'd always call it a strategic investment. But as the entrepreneur or the investor, you're looking for that strategic fit, because you could get 10 deals, and let's say all 10 have the same chance of success of winning. The one that the investor is likely to go towards is the one that's more strategically aligned with their passion, their purpose, their vision for their life, or some pet project, maybe even, who knows. But yeah, I think that's important for people to understand.
Yeah, and it's smart money. When it comes down to, you have someone that's going to dump some money into your business. You have two. Let's say you have person A, person B. Person A just gives you the money, kind of leaves you alone. Person B might have connections in the industry. They might have some big customers that they can introduce you to. There's a lot of things, in a lot of ways, a smart investor or smart money can help your business beyond just being a capital infusion. So that's something to think about too. I mean, there's a lot of value in that as well, to kind of help the business in ways that are beyond just financial part of it.
So one question I'll ask, and then I'm going to turn it back over to you, Jeff, is, do you feel that it's feasible now for companies to be able to bootstrap their way to the top, or is raising capital really a full-blown necessity these days?
I think bootstrapping and organic growth has its merits, and a lot of it's going to depend on your revenue and your business model, how that looks on paper. And again, it goes back to I kind of flogging the horse, but it's understanding your numbers and your finances kind of dictates that. And bringing in capital is kind of the rocket fuel for your business. If there's an urgency to be first to market, or to do, let's say you don't have the IP to protect your company, you just have to move fast. Well, organic growth might not be the way to go. You better get some capital in there and get off to the races, or somebody else is gonna kind of copy your model and beat you with it. So it totally depends on the situation. And but I think leverage in terms of growth and speed are really key. So, and again, it goes, think about the type of venture. Is this a lifestyle startup for somebody who just they just enjoy this business and they don't really care if they make tens of millions of dollars, or is this a scalable high growth type deal where you really have to have that capital infusion? And that may be a decision that's up to the entrepreneur at the end of the day. But I think more often than not, having some speed and having some capital on board makes a lot of sense. And it could be debt capital too. It doesn't have to be equity investment. You can go out and get loans and grow that way. Just depends on your cash profile and if you have the business to pay off the debt. But yeah, lots of options, and that's why modeling's so important. It's just kind of you look at different scenarios. You say, hey, this is the most likely scenario. This is the best case. This is the worst case. Are you going to survive in that worst case scenario? And if not, okay, well, why not? And maybe we need to figure some other things out. So that's the benefit of having that kind of that foresight and being able to figure out in advance, what's the best way to go.
Nice. Yep. And it all comes down to planning again. So making sure you have that understood. So awesome, Todd. Well, we are right about at time, and there's a couple of questions. Last questions I have for you.
Okay.
The first off is we didn't even hit on it, but you've written a book called The Adventure Consultant. And I know that people are probably going to be curious about that. So I want them to know, one, that you did write the book, The Adventure Consultant, Tales from the Entrepreneurial Trail. And also, how can people reach out to you? How can they get in touch with you?
All right. Well, I appreciate that. Yeah, I wrote that book. It was really kind of an accident, but I had a golden retriever for 14 years, and we traveled everywhere. I took this dog all over the country, from Alaska to Mexico and everywhere in between. When he passed away, I just started jotting down some ideas about just to try to remember some of the stuff that we had done. And then it just kind of morphed into this writing project, and I started writing about kind of my entire experience of going through business school and going through the corporate things that I went through. And so it's kind of autobiographical, but it's also, a tale about business as well. And, I hope to, it lets people know a little bit about who I am. And also, maybe it'll inspire some of the next generation coming up behind us that, that it can be a lot of fun. It can be an adventure. It's not just about work. Yeah, you got to roll up your sleeves and work really hard, but you can also have a lot of fun in the process. So that's kind of it. And if people want to reach out to me, there's a site for the book called theadventureconsultant.com, or they can go to bluehorizonvc.com and check us out. We love to help out anybody who's in need of help.
Awesome. Todd, thank you so much. I really appreciate having you on here and your time. I'm looking forward to reading the book. I apologize. I didn't even realize that you had that, because we hadn't really talked about that before setting this thing up. But I'm looking forward to getting a copy of that and reading through it and knowing a little bit about that, because I agree, nothing worse than spending your entire life in the office and not enjoying the fruits of your labor. So work hard, play hard. Let's have a good time doing this, and let's make an impact while we're at it. So again, Todd, thank you very much for being here. E-Rock, thank you.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Yeah, you bet. Great experience and great insights, Todd. Thanks for sharing your wisdoms.
You're welcome, and thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks, gentlemen. And we'll make sure to have all those links in the show notes for you. So go ahead and head over to angelinvestorsnetwork.com and go to the podcast page to see the show notes. Thanks, everyone. Take care.
You've been listening to Angels, Exits, and Acquisitions with your host, Jeff Barnes, brought to you by the Angel Investors Network. Remember to subscribe to this podcast on Apple iTunes or wherever you like to listen to your podcasts. Go to www.angelnetwork.com for tools, resources, show notes, and more, as well as our free training on how to become a successful angel investor and entrepreneur.